Hey, and welcome to another episode of Pastor's Perspective. I'm Michael David, in for Brian Perez. Pastor's Perspective is sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. We're here till 4 p.m. Pacific Time. We'd love to hear from you, so call us at 888-564-6173. 888-564-6173. We're also on YouTube and Facebook as well, and we thank you for listening. In today, we have Dr. Bobby Conway from the 1 Minute Apologist and 1 Minute Apologist on YouTube. You hear him on the Unapologetic radio program. He's the pastor of Image Church at Charlotte, North Carolina. And John Hwang is here as well. He's sitting in for Pastor Brian Broderson of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. John is the campus pastor and director of the Calvary Chapel Bible College. And you can learn more about that at ccbccostamesa.com. Gentlemen, thanks for being on the program today.
Good to be with you guys.
Well, thank you for being here, Michael David.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's been a while, yes, like 6 months or something like that. And I always listen to you guys, and you, Bobby Conway, had an amazing program yesterday. That was...
Oh, did you like that program?
I was driving around listening to that, just being amazed at what I was listening to. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed that.
You know what's interesting about yesterday's program, and for those that aren't listening, we got into this whole idea of what it means that God is spirit. And then there was discussion of Revelation chapter 4 and 5, where it seems like God's presence has been visibly manifested. And I found myself retorting a little bit at the idea that God eternally has any type of embodiment. Number one, for the ramifications that would cause, like the Mormons ended up doing that, and they embodied God. And so the argument yesterday that we were talking through was the whole idea that what does it mean that angels have, a spirit? And I'm like, I have no problem picturing them being embodied spirits, just as we have a spirit, but we're embodied. But I look at more of what we see with God as manifestations. I mean, when you think of God eternally, you're thinking like a center of consciousness. Right? Like we have consciousness, but it's invisible. You can't see that, right? Like mind is invisible. And so, we had some good time. Tony pushed back on me and I pushed back on him, but I would feel very uncomfortable with the idea that God eternally before creation, that existed in some type of form, albeit no matter how loosely it is. I think the vision of Revelation 4 and 5 is a manifestation of God that we get privy to see him because he makes himself known in certain ways. So that's what it was about.
Yes, that was amazing. Absolutely amazing. And if anybody did miss that, you can actually go to YouTube and just look for yesterday's date, which was March 29th, 2022, and you can see that in its entirety. Again, the number to call is 888-564-6173. We have some lines open, so you can call now, 888-564-6173. Also, you can contact us on facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. In fact, some people did that, so we're going to start off with that one. This one comes from Vicky. She says she recently came across a website that talks about 3 prophecies coming to pass that she knew nothing about, and she would really love to hear you talk about these 3 lesser-known prophecies. One is the birth of the red heifer in Israel. The second is the snake found in the Wailing Wall. And the third is the coming back to life of the Dead Sea. John Hwang, would you like to talk about those 3?
Well, when it comes to the heifer, there's a big movement among a lot of Christians today that are really deep into end times prophecy, and they are excited about any kind of announcement that there is a heifer found here or there or anywhere, because for them, their understanding is that the temple cannot be built and the worship services initiated until there is the sprinkling of the ashes of a red heifer. And that's why, this has been going on for years, and people have been highlighting, that they found one heifer in Europe, another heifer here in Israel, and just everywhere. And I, how do I say this?
You're not feeling the red heifer thing?
No, I'm just not feeling the red heifer thing. And so I just think that, I think that with end times prophecy, if we're not careful, we can be prone to just a real hyper sensationalized way of looking at prophecy in Scripture, and that can actually cause people to either be cynical of biblical prophecy or even mock it. And so I think that we should be careful on that one. I'm not sure about the whole serpent thing, but in regards to the Dead Sea coming back to life, that is connected back to the book of Ezekiel, speaking about the millennial kingdom when Jesus Christ comes back and establishes his kingdom on earth, that the Bible says that living waters are going to flow out from Jerusalem, and it's going to just flush out really all that water that, because of the mineral contents, the high salt content, I mean, there's literally nothing that could survive in the Dead Sea today. But apparently, according to the prophet Ezekiel, the Dead Sea is going to become a freshwater lake. In fact, there's descriptions of fishermen casting their nets into the Dead Sea, what we know as the Dead Sea today, and drying their nets on the shores. And so that living water of whatever that's going to look like during the millennial age, it'll bring life to that body of water that today is completely dead.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Awesome. Well, Vicki, thank you for your question on Pastor's Perspective. You sent that on Facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. We'll do one more. And also remember, you can call us 888-564-6173. Again, 888-564-6173. John Hwang and Bobby Conway are here to answer your question. This one on Facebook comes from Annette. And Annette says, today I had lunch with a few friends at a restaurant that is in a winery in the Temecula Valley. There was a popular lead pastor and his wife from one of the local Christian churches at the table over. He was with three couples, one being another pastor on staff at his church, along with a young boy around 8 years old. We watched as the group drank over 7 bottles of wine, and then the pastor and several from his table proceeded to the private wine room for club members only. My question is, are pastors to be held to a higher accountability than others when they consume alcohol in a public or private setting? When I read Romans 14:21, it seems clear that we should not drink as it may cause others to stumble. That being said, wouldn't it be wrong for a pastor to drink in public, which may cause others to stumble around him? Dr. Bobby, what would you say?
It sounds like that was an excessive amount of wine, 7 bottles for 3 couples, so that would be problematic, and I would agree with that. In Romans chapter 14, it does say it's not good to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that causes your brother to stumble. The question is, will drinking cause your brother to stumble? I think some might make the argument it's better not to drink in public at all because you don't know who might be seeing you there, and they could stumble by that. And I think that there is some legitimacy to that. At the same token, I know many pastors and leaders do drink publicly, and they have thought through this issue. I think the 7 bottles for 6 people is excessive. I do think that the Bible says the faith that you have in the following verse, Romans 14:22, keep between yourself and God. So in other words, if in your own conscience you feel okay drinking not 7 bottles of wine, but if you feel okay drinking, it does seem like, hey, you know, sometimes it's okay to do something in private. So, for example, we want to be vulnerable, we want to be transparent, but it almost seems like we have a little bit of license in a verse like this to realize that there are certain freedoms that we might have that other people might not have, and we don't have to go broadcasting our freedoms. Now, as I wrap up, and it relates to drinking in public. For me personally, if I was to go out and the pastor ordered a drink, it wouldn't bother me in the least, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. I think maybe when I was a new Christian, I would have been thrown off by that, but I could have been quickly educated out of that by understanding what the Bible has to say. So I think this is going to come down to a conscience thing. I do think we need to be aware of the settings that we're in. I think we need to avoid being flagrant in these type of ways. But if a husband and a wife, if they're on a vacation together and they are able to drink in moderation, then I can see that. Lastly, I would say we forget that Jesus and the disciples and in the ancient Greco-Roman culture would have drank wine. And there's lots of times where people want to say, oh, you know what? Yeah, but it was just 1 part alcohol, 9 parts water. So it was so diluted down, it didn't make a difference. But then you look at Joseph and we think about his impeccable leadership, and it talks about how merry he was with his brothers. And you see that type of language in other places, like that they drank and they were merry. In other words, they were experiencing the happy effects of alcohol, yet without drunkenness. So I don't think it's as easy as just say you can't ever do it in public, but I don't think it's as easy as saying you just can do it in public whenever you want either.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Thank you, Dr. Bobby. And thank you, Annette, for contacting us on facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. We're going to go to the calls now, and we're going to start with Paula in Long Beach. Paula, welcome to the program.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi, sorry. My question is, in Leviticus 4, you have all of the sin offerings, a multitude of offerings. My question is, how do they decide on which animal, whether it be a male or a female, boy or girl, or ox or bull, whatever? So this question is for Pastor John Hwang, because he wasn't here the day I called.
All right. Very much. Okay, John, you're on.
Well, I mean, that's what the book of Leviticus is there for. The word or the title Leviticus means pertaining to the Levites. And so it's really a manual for those that were involved in the tabernacle services in terms of how offerings and sacrifices were to be not only offered, but also conducted. And I think one of the things that's really important for people to understand when they read the book of Leviticus is that all of these sacrifices and offerings that are there, they served a purpose. And, you know, when we look at it prophetically, these sacrifices pointed to the ultimate sacrifice who was yet to come, and that was Jesus, the Lamb of God. But real time at that moment, these sacrifices was the means by which people could come into meeting God. And remember, this is one of the beautiful things about the biblical narrative. You know, when sin entered the world, there was separation between humans and God. And yet we see God initiating his rescue plan by promising the coming of the Messiah. And then one of the powerful moments in the story of the Bible is that in the book of Exodus, God comes down to a mountain on Mount Sinai, and he invites people to come and meet with him there. But the people were terrified, and they said, we don't want to come near it, so we'll have Moses go. And so what does God do? God comes down to their level in the presence of the tabernacle. So from heaven to a mountain, from a mountain to ground level in the tabernacle. But the problem is that people still couldn't come before God. And so God then provides means by which people could interact with him, and that was through the sacrifices and the priesthood. And so when you read these sacrifices and offerings in the Old Testament, God gives specific instructions in how they were to be carried out, which animals to be used. So much so that he even talks about which animals in the dedication and the ordination of the priesthood. And so that's why the book of Leviticus is so helpful, especially for the Levites, because God didn't leave it for the people to guess on how God wanted things done. He gave specific instructions related to which animal, how many animals, which gender of animals, and how they were to be conducted. So I would just encourage you to just think about that as you, read through the book of Leviticus, because this was the manual for the Levites and how to conduct these offerings.
All right. Paula, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you for that so much, because when I do read it, I didn't hear it until you just said it, that it's God telling them which animal to bring and how to do it. I don't know. When I read it, I just thought that they were picking it for themselves for some reason.
Yeah. So when you read Leviticus, sometimes you'll see God talk about goats, sometimes lambs, sometimes rams and oxen, and sometimes they're grain offerings and meal offerings. And so all of those instructions are detailed in the book of Leviticus.
All right, Paula, thank you for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective. The number is 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173. Michael David in for Brian Perez, along with Dr. Bobby Conway and Pastor John Hwang. We're going to go to Jim in Bellflower. Jim, welcome to the program.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
What's your question today?
Yes, sir. I have some Bible study books called Word Studies in the Greek New Testament by Kenneth Wuest, W-U-E-S-T. And I was wondering if you had any comments about if you were familiar with the books and if you thought they would be appropriate for a home Bible study.
Good question. Dr. Bobby, what would you say to that?
Sure. Anything that's going to allow you to unearth what the New Testament has to say in its original language can be incredibly helpful. It can be a lot to process through books in hardback form as it relates to learning the original languages, in particular if you don't have any Greek or Hebrew grammar. So I think a better option is to get a good electronic program that you can get online, like Logos Bible software, and then use that. And I think that what's great about Logos is Morris Proctor does these different courses that he teaches you how to leverage Logos Bible software. And then once you learn some of the tricks of the trade, what it will do is it will help you to accelerate your learning. So if you're just using a set of commentaries, it can really bog you down in a paper format if you're dealing with the original languages. And so it's nice because when you know how to use Logos, you can just, have your New Testament open, and then you can just put the cursor right over the word you're interested in, click on it, and then the Greek automatically pops up. And so you can imagine how much time that saves you. So you could be going through the book of Romans, and every word that you're curious about, all you have to do is just put the cursor over the word of interest, click it, and then a Greek companion will pop up and will allow you to see it. And then if you're looking for like the best, most respectable resource to help you understand Greek lexicography, then the lexicon known as BDAG, B-D-A-G, would be your best resource. Hope that helps.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just say this about Kenneth Wuest. If I'm correct, I know that Kenneth Wuest has been a Greek professor for many years back in the day, and I believe it was with Moody Bible School. But the one thing about his word studies on the New Testament is keep in mind that was written more with a devotional bent. And this is where you might get mixed reviews by Greek professors and teachers. But I think that in terms of people that may not know Greek, but would just like to be able to get some gold nuggets, from the Greek language in the New Testament. I have enjoyed Kenneth Wuest for years. He's really, brought a lot of color to my own personal, Bible studies and just even, little nuggets as I'm preparing my sermons. But just keep in mind the way he writes and presents things. It would definitely be more, designed for a devotional, style of Bible reading. And so I think that this is where, finding a good exegetical commentary, a good evangelical exegetical commentary would actually give you more of the scholarship in terms of the original languages. But I think that Bobby's recommendation is so good, so spot on. I'm so thankful for my Logos Bible software that I have on my computer, and that's been really helpful. But yeah, in terms of just a devotional read and just an understanding on the New Testament, I think that Kenneth Wuest is safe.
All right. Well, very good, Jim. Thank you for your call from Bellflower, California. And if you do want to know more about the Logos Bible software, just go to logos.com. Logos is spelled Logos.com. This is Pastor's Perspective. 888-564-6173 is the number to call, 888-564-6173. We're going to go to Wyoming and talk to Tori. Tori, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hey.
So, I believe absent from the body, present with the Lord. And then, we talked about the Catholics having purgatory, but I just heard this guy on Pathway to Victory saying something to the effect that when people die, they go to Hades while they wait to go to the lake of fire. It kind of sounded like purgatory.
So your question is purgatory there or not? Is that the question, Tori?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of thinking I thought it wasn't, right?
That's a good question. John Hwang, what would you say?
Yeah, I can understand why there would be that confusion, but the way that, we talk about hell is different than the way the Catholics would speak about purgatory, because there is no, working off sins. There is no penance that's happening in hell or Hades. And so this argument is based on, in Revelation chapter 20, when we read about the great white throne judgment. The Bible says that death and Hades or hell give up their dead, and those whose names are not found in the book of life are thrown into the lake of fire. So it seems that the lake of fire is that place of eternal punishment. But until that day of final judgment, those who die without Christ go to what we commonly refer to as hell. Some people will use the term Hades, but it's like in Luke chapter 16, we read about the rich man and Lazarus, that the rich man went to a place called hell. And it is a place where there's separation from God, and it is punishment. But that place is momentary in the sense that everyone who dies without Christ, they are kept there all awaiting the final judgment that will happen at the return of Christ. And then they will all stand before Christ at the great white throne judgment. And then the final place, the forever place of judgment, will be that lake of fire. But it's not like purgatory in that people can stay there and there could be enough prayers for them and they could do enough penance, or they are punished for a period of time and then they can work their way out of hell. Once a person dies and goes to hell, that is forever. From looking at degrees of punishment, the final place would be that lake of fire.
All right. Tori, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I got one more. So is it safe to say as a Christian, absent from the body, present from the Lord, and then for a non-believer, absent from the body, present
with the Lord. What would you say? Would you say that's right, John?
Well, for a Christian, they're with the Lord. If they're not a Christian, they're separated from the Lord.
All right. Well, Tori, thank you for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective from Wyoming. We appreciate your call. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. 888-564-6173. We're going to go from Wyoming back to California to San Bernardino and talk to Mike. Mike, welcome to the program.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Doing well, thank you.
So my question is, my daughter, she's just turned 15, so she wants a belly button ring. And I'm not for it, but my wife is, so we're like going back and forth. So I just want you guys' perspective on that. How would you guys feel about that?
All right, very good. Dr. Bobby, what would you say to that, to the belly button ring?
I think it's important that as a husband and a wife that you guys are aligned on that. I guess, let me ask that. Are you husband and wife?
Let me get him back here. Mike, are you husband and wife?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And I would say, I guess either way, just as a mother and a father, you ultimately want to be unified on this. I would really try to sit down, maybe even with your daughter, and ask, why does she want it? You really get her heart on it. Try to sense that. Maybe some of the fears that you have about her getting it are not the way that she's thinking. And so, you can always wait till she's 18, but I also, am sympathetic to, people in these situations that you're in. This is a challenge, and I would just say, don't let it drive a wedge between your intimacy. I would say that's really first and foremost. And I would, if your wife's not going to get on board with you, so to speak, then, you got to ask if you can get on board. If you can't get on board, then maybe it's just both you guys sitting down and having a talk with your daughter about the importance of oneness in marriage, and just saying, every now and then a husband and a wife, they won't see things eye to eye. And this is a tough situation because, you know what, I feel a little bit outnumbered by mom and by you, but I have a check about this. And, I think you're going to have to be prepared to explain to her why you think it's wrong, your reasons, and then that might be fruitful discussion, because the reasons that you might start listening to her, and I would imagine it has stuff to do with not wanting your daughter to have something that the boys are going to see, and I'm sympathetic to that, for sure. I can understand that, but I ultimately think you guys are going to have to work this out as a husband and wife.
And John Hwang, you worked with young people for a long time. You must have had to deal with this issue at least once or twice over your years working with young people, yes?
And when you got your belly ring, John, what was that like for you? Was that a big discussion, or?
Well, it had to be a big one because my belly's pretty big. But sorry. But I think your response is really good, Bobby. I think of this stuff not only as a pastor but as a dad. There's nothing wrong in and of itself of having a belly button ring, but the question is, it seems like kids now, especially with social media and with all the pressure of what's out there and what's visible, doesn't it just seem like kids are trying so much harder to look like adults as kids, and especially the pressure that a lot of young women are having to face in terms of like, are their bodies the right shape, and are they looking the right way, and and then for a young girl, I'm glad you brought this up, and like when you're putting jewelry on your belly button, it's like usually people want to do that in order to showcase off that part of their body, you know? And so I think that our society is already super sensual. And so I think that what you shared was so good, that as parents, to have that discussion, like how fast do we really want our daughter to grow up in this world where there's all this pressure in terms of like, appearance. And so, but I think it's important to understand like the jewelry itself is not the sin. But I think as parents to be able to have the discussion of like, man, is this really the right time for our 15-year-old girl to be thinking like this, and for us to have this discussion, is the conversation I think that you as parents should have.
And I think it's important too, like for kids to realize sometimes that the things that they want can become a pressure point for mom and dad.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of selflessness that I think that kids should have sometimes. Like, hey, you know what, mom and dad, it's cool. If you guys aren't in alignment on this, I don't want to cause any problems in your marriage, because relationship should trump the desire on this. Nevertheless, Mike, you might talk to your daughter. There could be... I don't know. You don't want to get into like controlling like when her belly's exposed or whatever, but I guess you could say something like, hey, if you're not going to, expose it, but then I guess why would you want a belly button ring if you're not going to expose it? Maybe some people just like knowing it's there, in the same way that somebody might get a tattoo in a spot that is more discreet. So that's why there's a conversation worth having. And I would say just maybe a point of advice for the conversation, when you do have that, try not to shut the conversation down. Kids like to express themselves, and they respect us a lot more if we're willing to pull away and process. If we just say something like, no, because I said so, that's going to cause them to dig in deeper. So I think that if you were to say something like, look, I just want to hear your thoughts and I'd like to pull away. I'm not giving an answer in this moment. I'm sharing with you where I've been, but I feel like I should at least be able to pray about it, think about it, and then come back with you for a further conversation. In the meantime, I'd ask you to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's a tough situation, and great advice, you guys. I mean, like you said, Dr. Bobby, if he has a check in his spirit, he definitely is going to have to follow through with that. And like you said, John, sometimes it is about drawing attention to that part of the body. So We don't want to do that, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mike, but perhaps that's what you were thinking. But I think the pastors gave you some real good advice there. So we are going to have to take a break. We'll be back with more of your phone calls in just a little while. We're here till 4 o'clock today. 888-564-71. 888-564-6173 is the number. 888-564-6173. Bobby Conway and John Hwang are here. We'd love to hear from you soon. 888-564-6173. Welcome back to Pastor's Perspective. I'm Michael David in for Brian Perez. I'm joined by John Hwang, one of the assistant pastors at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and Dr. Bobby Conway from Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. The number to call is 888-564-6173. 888-564-6173, and the pastors will answer your questions on the Bible, the Christian faith, and how to live the Christian life. We love to hear the sound of your voice, and we also love to hear your Facebook questions as well. You can send your Facebook questions to us at facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. Here's one of them from Monica. She says she's been dating a man who is a Christian whom she led back to church. In the beginning, they were a God-based couple, but they got intimate. They're 53 years old, and at this point, marriage is up in the air. Aren't we a little old to be thinking about being married before intimacy? And the second question she has is, when God comes to judge heaven and hell, what do you think he will do to those he'd place judgment on? Are we on a time? Are we, basically, she knows hell wasn't made for us, and she wants your perspective on it. So let's start with that first question. Are they a little old to be thinking about being married before intimacy? Monica and the man she's with right now, they're in their 50s. John, what would you say to that?
Well, what I would say is we will never outgrow our place of obeying Christ as the disciples and the followers of King Jesus. I think that one of the things that we need to remember is that when we come to Christ, we are pledging our allegiance to a new king. There's a point that we recognize that whatever kingdom that we are living for and whatever king we were serving and slaves to, that Christ, when he came and he died on the cross, he did all of that to bring us out of the kingdom of darkness and to bring us into the kingdom of light, to bring us out of a dictator rule. Ephesians tells us that we were slaves to Satan, and Christ brought us into his kingship. And so I think that whenever people ask the question, as a follower, can I do sin and it's okay and get away with it, then there's a really unhealthy understanding of what it means to be a follower of King Jesus. And so, to go to that question, and I really see the two questions that were asked related, because it seems like the second question is the follow-up of so if I want to continue living the way I want to live, what are the potential consequences to that? Well, one of the things that I would encourage you to even think about is, where are you in your relationship with Christ? 1 John chapter 3 tells us that, is it possible for Christians to sin? Absolutely. But is it possible for Christians, so-called Christians, or let me take that back. Is it possible for Christians to continue living in sin in a habitual way with this, I don't give a rip of what God cares about my lifestyle? And the answer is no. And so if you're looking for ways that you can continue in what is clear disobedience to God, then we would like to ask you a question in terms of where is your relationship with Christ? And so that really is at the heart of it. It's not when you want God to conform to your wants and desires, things are backwards. As Christians, we want our desires to be conformed to His will. As Paul said, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Yeah, that's really good, John. And I think sometimes people have this picture of God as it relates to our moral purity, that He is a Victorian deity who is trying to put us in a moral straitjacket. And I think that we need to step back and realize that He's actually trying to protect us from a life of consequence and brokenness. So, for example, take the idea of waiting for intimacy until you're married. If everybody applied that principle, there would be no such thing as an STD. That's a pretty big win. Not only that, we do the relationship in reverse order when we start off with intimacy. It's important because God wants the couple to make sure that they do love each other for something more than what they can offer one another bodily. And why is that? Well, if you are going to grow old together, you're going to have something deeper than intimacy to go the distance. On top of this situation, dating and courtship is a time not to be getting ahead of the principles and acting like you're already married. It's a time where we learn to show that we're trustworthy as people. And so God wants us to be secure in our relationships. And so if you're in a situation where you're already willing to violate these principles in an unmarried sense, then how can you be trusted when you're married? And how can this boyfriend be trusted when you're married? And so what God is offering to us is a vision free of STDs, is a vision of marriage built in the right order, and a vision of marriage that allows us to have what all of our souls long for in relationship, and that is marital security. And I think that that is something that can really be big. I know in my own past, I was very promiscuous. And after I got sober, when I was 21, I'd been a Christian for about a year and a half, wrestling there and with my promiscuous lifestyle. I ended up making a commitment. And I said, God, I really want to pray that you would help me in my own marriage. And Heather and I were able to wait for almost 2 years. And by God's grace, that wasn't easy. But you know what happened? She was aware of my checkered past. And she saw that, you know what? God had taught me to be a tamed man. And every woman wants to know, as a Christian woman, I would think, that her husband can have his thoughts tamed so that they're not running rampant. So hopefully we spoke cryptic enough in this conversation for the little ones, but I hope it also helps.
Yes, very good advice. Monica, thank you for contacting us on Facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. Let's do one more. By the way, you can still call us 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173. Another Facebook question. Rick says, my friend is a very intellectual person, and they're seeking to understand if God truly exists. She is trying to understand the truth. Other than my testimony and verses about creation, are there some good verses or passages for her to consider? She agrees that she has sinned. Can she have a true conversion without believing God created the earth? Dr. Bobby, what would you say to that?
I think that there's something of interest in the fact that she believes that she has sinned. Mm-hmm. What is she measuring her fall against, right? So I feel like I've committed moral failures in life. That's what she seems to be recognizing. Well, to whom has she morally fallen? Like, okay, according to an earthly human standard? Well, human standards vary from person to person. So this is just subjective morality. And so why be feeling guilty for doing things that one person says is wrong, but another person says is right? Who's to arbitrate between the two? And this is where I think one place to go, if you're looking for some scriptures, Romans chapter 2 talks about how God has written his moral law, right, on the very fabric of our heart. It's on our conscience. So I think that the concession, I have a sense that I've done something wrong, that I've sinned, is in line with Romans chapter 2. Now, philosophically, the moral argument can be very rich in this type of a way, whereby we think about this. Because take, for example, the idea of guilt. When she's saying, I feel like I've sinned, what she's saying is I recognize that I'm guilty of sin. Okay, well, what does it require for us to be guilty? Well, there needs to be a moral law that was broken, and we would say that God gave us the moral law. Somebody has to be offended, and we would say that God is the one who is offended. We would say that only a personal agent can be offended, right? So it's not like the rock's offended when we do something wrong, a personal agent, and that's God. And so when we feel a sense of guilt, we've offended someone, namely God, who is the moral lawgiver. Not only that, why is it that when we feel like we sin, that we have these ugly feelings of guilt? I think guilt is like a check engine light. It shows us something's broken in us. And for those that are out there, there are some atheists that would say that, well, why not just say that there's a malevolent God, that God is evil? I think we can make an argument straight from guilt to a good God. Well, why is that? Because whenever we feel the pangs of guilt, say, I feel guilty for lying, we feel that because God is showing us that he is truth, right? That he is not lying. If somebody feels guilty for murdering somebody, well, God is life-giving. And so we can take these things that we feel guilty about, and God is waking us up that we're violating his good nature. And so I think that this person could find some service by reading maybe a less philosophically intense book, a popular level book called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And the first several chapters talk about this moral law. And I would say that this is a great place for maybe your friend to read, because C.S. Lewis was an atheist, then he was a theist, then he became a Christian, and the moral law was richly at work in his life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and then in response to, can this person be converted to Christ without believing that God created the world? Absolutely. A lot of times the theology that people are going to be discovering about God, that may come later. But man, one of the things that I love about when Jesus was talking about the new birth, he said, man, it's like the wind. It's like you can't see where it's coming from or where it's going, but you can feel the effects of it. And so for you, you might, in your conversations with your friend, you may not have all the intellectual answers that you're hoping that you have, but you know enough to be able to share John 3:16 and to share the truth about God becoming human and dying on a cross and rising again from the dead. And she might still be left with a whole lot of questions related to that, like God becoming a man, all that stuff. But man, the Spirit of God could still work in your friend's heart, that she may not fully understand all the theology of it, but she knows enough to say, man, I am a sinner and I can't do anything about it. But if what you're telling me about God forgiving me of my sin, man, I don't fully understand it, but I believe it. And I want to just trust that God could do that for me. God can save that person. And in discipleship, she'll learn all sorts of new things as she's going through the Bible and learning about God and creation and about who he is, his nature being triune and his character, his attributes and all these things, you know, and that's the beauty of Christianity. I mean, we're all growing more deeply and further and broader in our understanding of God, but man, I mean, just the simplicity and the powerful message of John 3:16. Pray for your friend, share the gospel with your friend, and just believe that miracle of regeneration would just happen in her life.
That is such a big question, though. I do find myself thinking, okay, like I get what you're doing, John. You're not wanting to put any conditions, right? Okay, you need to believe in Jesus, plus you need to believe this, some of these things that we learn about discipleship. But it is almost inconceivable how you would believe that Jesus is your Savior without believing that God created the world. But I know exactly what you're trying to do there. It's like the moment you start putting these extra conditions in place, but the very essence of who God is. So I guess maybe if this person believed in a steady state theory that the universe always existed simultaneously with God, like some of the ancient Greeks believed, but then that would be problematic because we know, like with the second law of thermodynamics, that the universe is running out of usable energy. We know that the universe is expanding, and so if you could rewind that process, you would come back to a singularity. So we don't really have good evidence in the steady state theory, though there are some who are wanting to make a resurgence out of this again, as well as the earth being flat. But I would say that is an important point, because who is this person coming to, right? Yeah. Like, okay, I believe in Jesus, that he died for my sins, but the nature of Jesus, he's the one who created all this, and he's the one who sustains all this. So in discipleship, though, no one does know everything about Jesus. Yeah. I mean, we don't know everything about Jesus on the other side of justification either, but that would be an interesting point, but keeping it on the cross is important.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because that does bring some clarity, because we definitely want to make sure that we communicate which God we're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, because every religion is going to have their form of God, and the Christian God is the creator of the world. But when it comes to, in terms of like, the details of Genesis 1 and those kinds of things, I think that people, there's just going to be a lot of questions that people are going to have. But you're right, though. I think that when you do talk about God becoming human in the person of Jesus, that we have to be clear about the God that we are talking about. It's not the Mormon God. It's not the Jehovah's Witness God. It's not the God of Islam. It is the Christian God. And so I get that point too, Bobby, because that's really helpful, because you're right. I mean, when we're talking about the God who entered the world, he is the creator. But will that person, it's just, I also know that there is that supernatural side to regeneration too, that I just don't want to dismiss.
Well, yeah, I mean, and like people go to a Harvest Crusade, right? And they hear Greg Laurie and he gets up. Well, Greg Laurie, I'm sure he's done lots of Harvest Crusade messages where he doesn't get into the fact that God's the creator. His focus is on the fact that we could be forgiven of our sin. And these people then are offered an opportunity to be saved. Well, I'm sure that the Lord has saved plenty of people in that way, and then they start figuring out what all that entails. None of us know what all this entails when we come to believing in Jesus, but it does seem like such a big thing. Like, okay, he is the creator, but good conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you, Rick, for contacting us on facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. and using the instant message feature. You can do that as well. And you can call us too, 888-564-6173. We love the sound of your voice, 888-564-6173. We're going to go down to San Diego and talk to Philip. Philip, how can we help you today?
Oh, thank you. I'm assuming you can hear me fine.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. This is in reference to an earlier question somebody asked about Greek resources, and you kind of gave a one thumbs up on an author named Weiss, and then the Logos computer program got 2 thumbs up. And I'm somebody that my wife and I have been in a lot of small groups, and often we're teaching from New Testament. And when I've gotten stuck, I don't have any Greek background, and I'll sometimes use the Message Bible by Peterson, and sometimes it helps me clarify what the passage is saying. And I just wanted to find out if you think it's a valid source of knowledge of what the Greek is saying.
All right. Very good question, Philip. Dr. Bobby, what would you say?
I think that there's nothing wrong with looking at various versions as long as we understand the place that they hold. So, for example, there are translations that are known as your more literal type. None are completely literal, and by that I mean you're taking the Greek words of the New Testament or the Hebrew words of the Old Testament and a little bit of Aramaic sprinkled in between. And what's happening if you're translating a Bible into English is you're trying to find the word in English that most accurately represents the word, let's say, in Greek. And when you're trying to do a literal translation, you're trying to show words that literally correspond the best. But there's not going to be any perfect literal translation, but they fall into that department. Then you have what is known as dynamic equivalent translations. Okay, so your literal translations are going to be like your King James, New King James, English Standard Version, NASB. But then the dynamic equivalent, they're not going to be trying to take the Greek word and then try to find the equivalent literal word in English. They're going to try to translate the idea of it. So maybe they're going to find a Greek word and they're going to say this idea captures what the Greek word means. And that's dynamic equivalent. And that would be like NIV or NLT, New Living Translation. Then you have what is known as the paraphrase traditions of translation, and this would be the Living Bible and the Message. And this would be adding words. So it's not word for word attempt. It's not even trying to capture the best idea. There's a recognition that you're offering some extra words to help make sense of it. And I would say that it's fine as long as you know that that's what's taking place, and you're not preaching from it, so to speak. I mean, from a devotional, Eugene Peterson does a great job of just helping put it in a language that you know can make sense. I mean, in Hawaii, they have the pidgin version of the Bible. And so anybody that says, oh, well, that's just wrong, you can't look at the Message. Well, basically, any kid's Bible is a paraphrase, right? It's just not called the Message. But you get your kids reading at a young level, and it's going to be paraphrased, and that's okay. We're not going to have a problem with it as long as the whole point of the translation is sticking to the truth of the message coming through. So notice the Message Bible. Eugene Peterson is trying to capture the message that is taking place. And if you're stuck capturing the message in a literal translation, then going to the Message can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. All right. Philip, did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. What I end up doing is I look at the Message if I'm stuck, and sometimes I come away thinking, yeah, this gives me more insight. But other times I think, no, I think I got more insight from the NIV, which is the one I usually study. So you kind of wonder, you're hoping that the Holy Spirit guides you into knowing what God's really trying to say. But what you said was helpful, but there's still questions in my mind. But I think I'll keep using it because I don't think you gave it a thumbs down.
Yeah. And ultimately, too, when you're looking at like a study Bible, you want a study Bible that has been put together by a compilation of different scholars. Yeah. So, for example, no one person, like is a scholar in all 66 books of the Bible. So you take Douglas Moo, who's a scholar in the book of Romans, or Gordon Fee, who's a scholar in Philippians or in 1 Corinthians. Nobody is a scholar on all 66 books. Typically, it's very rare to even find someone who's a scholar in both Greek and Hebrew. So sometimes you get these Bible translations or study Bibles, and they're put out by one individual. And it's important that we get a really strong study Bible because what the council will do when they start putting that together, they're going to find the top-notch scholars for each of the different 66 books who are just very, very gifted in that particular genre and that particular book. And so our study notes are going to be the most robust. The danger when we just get the study Bible from the one person, if we don't consult other things, is we might find in some places that we're getting more limited viewpoints.
Yeah, and that's where I like to apply that stuff even in Bible translations. I think it's important. I really enjoy Eugene Peterson's The Message, but I understand, like Bobby said, it's a paraphrase, and whenever you've got a paraphrase, you generally get that person's interpretation on passages, and so as much as I could refer to The Message, just for some help in some passages, I don't use that as my primary text when I study the Bible, But the thing is, when you look at, for example, the English Standard Version Bible or the New International Version Bible, that was a committee of Bible translators from all sorts of different denominations that got together to translate from the original languages, the Bible, into English. And so to have that kind of input in these Bible translations, man, we are at a huge advantage in the English-speaking world. And I think that for us to have all these different translations, as Bobby so wonderfully explained, from word for word to thought to even the paraphrase, we've got all these Bibles that we can access and compare verses with to get a clearer understanding to what the original text said in their languages. And what's amazing is that they're so accessible for free. You can get the YouVersion Bible app, or you can go to the, Bible Gateway or Blue Letter Bible, and you've got all of these Bible translations at our fingertip. And we are blessed in the English-speaking world.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Philip, for your call from San Diego. We appreciate your call and your question. It looks like we are just about out of time. I really wanted to hear from Isaiah from West Point, New York. Please call back tomorrow, as well as Mark from Idlewild and Pam from Murrieta. We are just about out of time today. We are going to be back tomorrow between 3 and 5 p.m. when Brian Perez will be back. So I know you're looking forward to that for a 2-hour Thursday. So we want to thank everybody for calling. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and YouTube as well. And Calvary Chapel Pastor's Perspective is sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. I'm Michael David for John Hwang and Bobby Conway. Good night, and thanks for joining us.